We have not had a show since last Friday, and there have since been some very big hockey games in the Four Nations tournament. So as we get ready for tomorrow's final, Canada-US, which we're going to do a post-game show in lieu of our regular podcast, Lia, what are your thoughts about the Four Nations tournament?
I love it. I think it's been so fun. I think all-star games are good in concept, but poorly executed, and this gets rid of all of the bad of it. I mean, it's gotten me so excited for the Olympics. I plan to be watching tomorrow. The beginning of that US-Canada game was like a moment I will never forget. And I think the injuries, I get the concern about that, but like overall, it seems like it's worth it, even if a few guys get hurt here and there, and the players seem to like it, and that's kind of what matters most.
Luds?
I'd say, I think it's been great. Obviously, the U.S. and Canada, and we're looking forward to that. Obviously, I sent Billy Guerin a message after that.
Name dropper.
Yeah, well, I did, and what I said is, I feel like this hockey team of his or theirs has brought the country together. It just seems like there's people that are acknowledging the game more than probably just being the casual watcher. And then I also wonder what do you do to replicate this? I mean, is the All-Star game going to be, the All-Star game has got a bit of a downslide going anyways, right? So I wondered if they would ever do anything, different, or I don't know how you bring the All-Star game anywhere near what's going on here. I do say that I think I'd like to see some of the other players play also. I'd like to see Ovechkin and, all the rest of the guys playing an event like this, not just the four countries.
That's an interesting question. And Sam, I want your thoughts on the Four Nations as well. But as we talked about, we know that the World Cup of Hockey is coming back in 2028. They're hopeful it'll be an every 4-year experience so that it will be 2 years between a World Cup of Hockey and then the Winter Olympics. They've already committed to the next 2 Winter Olympics. So we're going to have 6 years in a row of, well, not in a row, but every 2 years of best on best international play, which is fantastic. But what about those in between years? Are we going to see some sort of NHL All-Star thing? Or like Luddy said, do you turn it into like a Four Nations where you have USA, Canada, and then like Europe, North and South, or somehow to get those other team players in? And obviously at some point Russia needs to be involved. We'll keep away from the political landscape part of it, but that's a big deal too.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is if they do an all-star game in between those, it's easier to swallow knowing that it's in between a bunch of amazing international hockey events. It's a little more dreadful, I'll use that word, when it's every year and you're like, oh great, this is what I have to look forward to next February as well. When it's just a fun thing and you got another World Cup of Hockey or another Olympics coming up the next year, I think that'll make it a lot easier. But in terms of the Four Nations, I have loved every second of it. And I love the chaos of emergency players. I love that people think Canada is cheating and then the US is cheating. And then I love it all. I think it's all great for the sport. One thing I heard, I forget where I heard it, that I thought was really important was the US is a country so big in football, so big in basketball, that we need events to get excited about hockey. And that's just how it is. We need big events. We need the 1980 Miracle team. We need the World Cup of Hockey teams. This is that team that's getting people into hockey. I think it was like 4.4 million people watched that US-Canada game. And as Lia said, the first 11 seconds, that's what people will remember about this tournament. No matter what happens tomorrow, I think that's what people will think. And this tournament is one of those weird things where Jeff Merrick said it doesn't have a history and it doesn't have a future, right? This is probably it. So in 20 years, when someone's looking back at this tournament, they're not going to remember all the details, but they're going to remember, oh, that was that tournament where 3 people fought in the first 11 seconds and that crazy thing. That's why I think it's big for this sport, and that's why I think it's huge for our country.
Do you guys think there'll be any pushback from owners just because we're seeing some of these top superstar players have injuries? And
yes,
and I'm just curious about that. That's the one thing about the All-Star game is there's nobody getting hurt at an All-Star game. The only thing getting hurt there is their liver. That's usually the only thing.
Pride.
Yeah, right. But I mean, I'm just wondering if there will be any conversation about these guys getting hurt. And again, I just think that there should be times where your best players need some time off, and you lean on them all year long, and you want them to be in all these events because that's how they sell the game. But do we wear them down to the point where injuries occur more often?
Well, and I think that's probably the reason why you don't do it every year, and maybe you do sprinkle in an all-star game here and there, because I mean, those conversations have to be coming, especially after the statement the Bruins put out today with McAvoy and just the shade they're throwing at USA Hockey and the medical staff. I'm sure there are people upset about that, and it's going to impact them in the next couple of weeks here and months or however long it is. So I think if you're not doing it every year, maybe the conversations die down and it's a little easier to bring it back every few years. But yeah, I mean, I agree with the argument of your best players need a rest too, and it'll be interesting to see what it looks like when they all come back in the next few weeks.
They should just do an all-star cruise and maybe have a shuffleboard tournament or something like that while they're out there. I mean, there'll be nobody pulling a groiner and saying I can't go on that one. They'll get everybody to participate.
I wanted to ask you guys about the comment. Let's go to Lia on this first, because we talked about this last week. The idea that maybe a Four Nations or something like this needs to happen pre-season, meaning in September, so that even if there are injuries, you could have players rehabbing and still get back for, say, the second half of the season or so and into the playoffs. But Sam, to your point earlier, I think that this timing was brilliant because it's after the Super Bowl. So you had all these great moments. It's obviously USA Canada was probably the pinnacle of it, but Sweden Finland was fantastic too. And that's a big rivalry. The fact that they didn't get washed over the next day because of an NFL weekend or a playoff game or whatever. And if anything, going up against the NBA All-Star weekend was even a bigger gift because because the Four Nations isn't an All-Star game, right? It's completely different. And so you have people comparing All-Star, which is always tough to create any sort of competitiveness to, versus the most competitive tournament you can create. And I just think that the people that made the decision to do it now versus in September, I know it condenses the schedule, but Lia, I think the timing couldn't have been better.
I agree. I think for putting it in September, to me, just feels like you have this really exciting tournament, and then you have the beginning of a hockey season that like a lot of people just still aren't going to care about. And yeah, they might care for the first week, but then you got to get them through the next however many months until you get to playoffs. Like if you put it where it is right now, and people can stay, in it until the end of the season. And yeah, in this country, you just can't compete with football. I understand there's 3 other countries in this tournament, but it's not even worth trying. The college football, NFL, they're going to still get better viewership. So I think the timing was perfect.